Doom. To many, it's timeless. To imagine a world without Doom is to imagine a world without first-person shooters. It's one of the most beloved series in the history of video games, and the studio that created it, id Software, one of the most prolific.
There's an aura of mythos around id Software, the creators of a genre, the masters of Doom. The history of its founding fathers has been told over and over again, and with an early catalogue including names like Wolfenstein, Doom, and Quake, it's clear to see why. There was a rock and roll style to those early days of id that captured the adoration of 90s gamers. Romero's hair, the Ferrari 328, the congressional hearings. It painted the picture of a larger-than-life studio full of young men defining culture and doing so by breaking all the rules. But those days are gone, ghosts that both define and haunt the identity of modern id. And in recent years, as more of the founding fathers left for different shores, the studio's identity in the public consciousness has faded. One of the reasons for this is the recent blind spot in the history of id Software, one that stretches from the release of Rage all the way to now, a time when the studio went through some of its hardest days, a failed sequel, a buyout, an internal power struggle. But to the surprise of everyone, the punchline of this uncertain era was an incredibly confident game, a refreshing take on an old idea that seemed to do something that many had assumed was beyond the ability of id, to reflect its history through a modern mirror, to marry the old and the new.
The story of how Doom 2016 came to be is a rather messy one, so to tell it properly, we had to spend 2 full days at the studio interviewing the people behind its various iterations.
The goal was to tell a story of not only how this game was created, how they struck its self-aware tone and designed its combat chess, but also to tell the story of what happened for all those years.
So first we packed our bags to take a trip straight to hell. Richardson, Texas.
Perspective, we reference Doom 1 and Doom 2. Of course, in the dorms, everybody was playing Doom, diving in for hours at a time. It was awesome. I mean, everybody loved Doom. We thought it was badass. Again, the movement, the no reloading, the no taking cover, those are all kind of fundamental elements of Doom 1 and Doom 2.
Well, it started with id back in '91 and working on Wolfenstein 3D. And then we moved on to, of course, Spear of Destiny, the sequel to Wolfenstein 3D, and then on to the Dooms and the various Quakes. Started off actually doing some of the page layout stuff, and then also doing some of the art for Wolfenstein. And then for a long time, it was just Adrian and I doing the art. The roles have varied from time to time. Moved up to creative director on some projects, producer on others, but I still consider myself primarily an artist.
I joined as an employee in 1998. Had done contract work for maybe a year, 2 years prior to that. I had taken the editor that John had written and basically making it usable for Quake 3. When I joined as an employee, effectively that was towards the end of Quake 3, and we moved kind of immediately into Team Arena, and in addition to the editor stuff, started doing gameplay and just kind of everything, because there was 3 or 4 programmers kind of at best, so we all did a lot.
It wasn't necessarily the earliest days of id, but it was some pretty early days back working on Quake 2, back when the company was just 10 people or so. It wasn't like anything else, and just had a ball. Really enjoyed it and worked through Quake 2, the mission packs, the console versions of Quake 2, Quake 3 Arena was their producer there on that. It was very small. It was the kind of place where almost anybody in the studio would be a lead or a director at another studio. But it was interesting. There was just kind of a mystique to it. You had the plan files online, and that was kind of how people would follow the company or the musings of the people who had kind of become celebrities. It was personalities within the company very much defined defined the company, and you could see those fingerprints on the game. There was a bit of irreverence and an attitude that you didn't see in a lot of other games. It didn't feel corporate at all, and certainly when you showed up at the offices, it didn't feel corporate at all. I mean, we were kind of known for being that crazy video game developer in that big black cube out on the freeway in Mesquite, Texas, and you'd ride up the elevators and get to the 6th floor, and there was a sign out front that said, id Software 66 Suite 666, and you'd walk in and meet Miss Donna, just kind of the longtime id mom's been here more than 20 years, but she sat at a desk with a massive demon image behind her. It was fun, it was fun to go down and visit, and as much as I never believed growing up in Colorado and then living in LA that I would never move to Texas, when they offered the job, it was like, yeah, this is an opportunity of a lifetime, and so it's kind of 17 years later, it's still what I love, where I love to come.
When Marty joined id, the team had just started working on the expansion pack for Quake 3, Team Arena, a game that was spawned from the studio's addiction to Quake 3's Capture the Flag.
There's a group of us that played it, I don't remember which map it was Space Map, where the really short things with the BFG up here. And we played that 2 versus 2 CTF every day at 5 o'clock for probably 3 straight years. And I mean, I'm not kidding, every day, and it was this, we called it MO2, Master of the Universe. Whichever team won was current MO2, and it was some of the best times we had, because we were still tiny, like, 10 to 20 people, and yeah, really fun. A lot of screaming and yelling and cursing, and so tons of fun.
I was saying to Tim, that's probably like the fastest capture the flag in video game history. Like, you can do it in like 4 seconds.
Yes, it really is. So, and playing that often with the same teams, everybody had their strategies, and sometimes matches would be over just super fast, but it was super fun. A lot of good memories.
After Team Arena, the team moved on to Doom 3, a game that took the series in a more narrative direction that had the player fighting demons in beautifully lit but often claustrophobic corridors. The game found an audience, but many felt it had sacrificed gameplay in search of breaking new technical ground. Robert Duffy was lead programmer on the project, a game designed by a shockingly small team by modern standards.
It was really small. I think we finished Doom with around 19 people in the studio, maybe low 20s, but it was mostly built by 15, 16, 17, 18 people, something like that. I liked a lot of the effects that we did, imps spawning in, and we had the ability to tie lighting, like sound amplitude to light. And it was kind of the level of craftsmanship that I think that we put in the game as a studio. We were honestly too obsessive with quality, I think. Every pipe had to connect up, and just, the whole driving force kind of behind the studio was just quality and polish, and a really fun project.
It's interesting how, like, when people talk about this Doom, they go like, oh, it's just like Doom 1 and 2, right? But like, in terms of environment and structure and stuff, it's actually got a lot of similarities with Doom 3.
Yeah, I mean, like the UAC, the kind of heavy industrial feel. We do reference, probably more from a gameplay feel perspective, we reference Doom 1 and Doom 2, Again, the movement, the no reloading, the no taking cover. Those are all kind of fundamental elements of Doom 1 and Doom 2. Doom 3 did a lot to develop UAC as kind of that evil corporation. It had a weighty oppressiveness to it in an interesting way. It's still one of my favorite games that we made.
After Doom 3, we'd started another project that internally we called Darkness. We worked on that a year, maybe year and a half, and just kind of figured we weren't feeling it, as a studio. We were still independent, and so we had the flexibility and the freedom to just kind of say, this isn't working, not working out. And Tim kind of came in and he walked into my office one day and he was like, big machines and apocalyptic setting and all this crazy stuff, and so that was kind of how Rage started.
Rage was a brand new venture for id, utilizing John Carmack's impressive mega texture technology. It depicted a vivid Mad Max style world, one full of areas to explore, cities full of people to talk to, and even cars to drive.
It was certainly different than what we had done. The wastelands were kind of built in pieces for some technology reasons, but that was one of the proving grounds, and I think that it was one of the areas where mega texture really shined, and especially the ability to stamp on it and kind of unique everything up. Vehicle combat was certainly challenging. I think it's challenging for most people that do it, to get it right and to kind of keep a shooter feel. But yeah, the outdoor areas, specifically on the 360 and PS3, that much visual fidelity, 60 hertz. We push a lot of triangles through the engine, so there's a lot of design, art, and technical challenges in Rage.
But Rage wasn't the only project id was working on. John Carmack had hinted that Doom 4 was in development at QuakeCon 2007, and the game was officially announced to be in production the following May. Then CEO Todd Hollinshead suggested it played homage to Doom 2, as it was set on Earth during a hellish invasion. In June of 2009, ZeniMax Media, the owners of Bethesda Softworks, acquired id Software and its intellectual property. But still, no images, videos, or teasers of the game ever surfaced. Even after Rage was finished in 2011, and Carmack insisted that even more resources would be put towards the Doom project. In fact, over the next few years, the public was sent mixed messages over the state of the game's development.
So the way we were kind of structured for a while in the, late 2000s was we had a team that was working on Rage. Tim was directing that. We had a team that was working on Doom, kind of the campaign version of the past iteration of it. I was kind of leading a team of multiplayer developers that we'd done Quake Live, and we kind of moved into Doom development. And we finished Rage. That team finished Rage, and we were big. We had finished Doom with 19 people, and at a point, once we had almost 3 full teams, we were pretty large. So lot of growing, typical stuff. Every company talks about when they grow, the kind of communication and all those kinds of things that kind of come into play. There was kind of this moment after Rage where we started looking a bit more at Doom, and again, a long period of evaluation and adjustment.
The period that followed was a rather caustic one for the studio, and Doom 4 one of its many victims. So it's understandable that id have never really talked about the game.
For years, Doom 4 was the elephant in the room that id never spoke about, and as a result, the conversation around this game has been dominated by a leaked CG trailer and a 2013 Kotaku article that painted the picture of a heavily scripted military-style shooter. So much so that rumor mill articles and message board conversations often refer to this project as Call of Doom.
But there were so many lingering questions. What was Doom 4? How did it play? How did it inform the 2016 version? I was worried that many of the answers to these questions would be lost to time with all the recent departures, but as it turns out, the creative lead on the project was none other than id's veteran Kevin Cloud.
So I would say, what we had done is we had sort of explored a direction and got to a certain point and felt like that this wasn't really capturing what we felt like was Doom, was going to be a strong Doom, and what the fans would want from it.
You mentioned the term Call of Doom has been thrown around. It was much closer to something like that type of game. A lot more cinematic, a lot more story to it, a lot more characters around you, and that you were with kind of throughout the course of the gameplay. Definitely different setting. It took place on Earth.
Robert Zemeckis Contact, kind of like if this really happened. Now, granted, just want to be clear, it was awesome, but it was more realistic. It was more about the global impact of a hellish invasion.
Unbelievable production value. It was really good from that perspective, but it was definitely a twist on Doom that took it into a much more cinematic, much more scripted type of experience. It was a reimagining of Doom in a way that was new. I mean, it was totally new. When you were taking cover and you were popping up and shooting shooting enemies, and the demons looked a lot different. It took a while to get into like actually fighting demons. You were kind of fighting a lot more zombie type creatures kind of early in the game.
As far as the upper level creative direction of that was me driving that, and honestly, again, taking it in a direction I didn't think that ultimately the fans would have enjoyed as far as a Doom fan, but it's just trying to get more sort of character interaction, a little bit of more connection to the world.
As a concept, I could see why they went there, because I would probably want to explore that too, if it wasn't a Doom game, you know, because it sacrificed, to tell a bigger story, it sacrificed the Doom Slayer. And Doom is about one guy involved in big things, and Doom 4 Classic was more about the big things.
It kind of comes off that idea you talked about earlier about like the Pinky, right? You said you had a vision of redoing the Pinky in Doom 3 and in this new Doom. They're very different, but to me they both felt valid, right? And I think what ultimately happened is that, you know, I was kind of taking it in that, I'm not going to say Doom 3 direction, because it definitely wasn't that, but that conceptually is that idea. I was taking it off path and went too far in that path.
So I guess what was the sort of impetus to stop it?
You know, there's always a lot that, you know, 1,000 conversations that go into something like that. The biggest, I think, was that, I mean, I guess the best way to say it is it didn't feel as much like Doom as I think a lot of us expected it to feel, or hoped it would feel. It all boils down to just kind of feel, and I give Bethesda a lot of credit for kind of sticking with us through those decisions, because it takes a lot to stand by a developer saying, you know, it just doesn't feel right. Very
tough, I have to say, for me personally, very tough time. But you know, in hindsight, I think that the studio and ZeniMax made wise decisions there. And ultimately, I love Doom, right? So I want to make sure that it goes out every time as something that the fans love.
There was actually a period of time between kind of like the end of 2011, the end of 2012, and right at the beginning of 2013, where we kind of did I don't know what you'd call it, like 2 reboots or kind of a rolling reboot.
Sort of took a step back and re-examined what we consider to be the fundamental elements of a Doom game.
We kind of asked Todd Vaughn, who's the VP of Product Development at Bethesda from the publishing perspective, to come down and spend some time with us. I think we were struggling with a lot of stuff, kind of an unwieldiness of how big the company was, and kind of some focus issues. There's a lot of stuff involved when you go through that process, and I would say one of the big changes coming out of that was we need to kind of refocus the studio just on one project.
In the years that followed, the team was shaken up. Todd Hollinshead and John Carmack left the studio. Carmack now works for Oculus and is currently in litigation with id parent company ZeniMax over an IP dispute.
Change is never easy for some people. You always go through that kind of stuff when you're changing. We had people who didn't agree and left. We had other people that didn't agree and we let go. You know, for some it's empowering, and for others it's demoralizing. But it's what you go through. You know, it's like any kind of big change in life or if you've ever been part of a team, it's you know, kind of, you know, I use sports analogies all the time. You know, if you're part of the Broncos and they go from, you know, one type of defense to another type of defense, you know, it's like, man, I don't like playing in the 4-3, I like the 3-4. So I'm gonna be upset about it. Or you can kind of embrace it and just be like, yeah, I understand, you know, we got this level of expertise and we wanna head this direction, and we're gonna do it.
The team was also bolstered by new blood. Hugo Martin, who previously worked at Naughty Dog and was responsible for designing the Jaegers for Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim, came on as creative director, while Crytek's former lead graphics engineer Thiago Sousa came on board as lead renderer programmer.
You know, when we first kind of rebooted this version of Doom, Marty, leading the project, certainly worked with him on the original Pillars, kind of the multiplayer campaign snap map. Pillars, obviously always involved in tech. We were starting to kind of assemble a tech team from programmers from both Rage and from the prior Doom 4 project. And then, Hugo came on board, and kind of at that time, Marty and Hugo really started running with the game side of things, and my focus really turned largely on technology and the engine team, and figuring out how the hell are we going to hit 60, on the consoles. So
it's a 3-year problem to worry about.
Yes. So, but it was a lot of fun over a lot of good collaboration.
It's been long assumed that once the team started work on rebooting Doom, they left all their old work on the cutting room floor. But one of the gameplay pillars of Doom 2016, the Glory Kills, finds its origins in what the team refer to as Doom 4 1.0.
No matter where you're at, you're always kind of a collection of everything that's happened before you. So, it's been said that like we looked at this game and then we scrapped it, and we decided to do this, and that's a nice sound bite. But there were definitely things that I'll give you an example. Like the previous iteration had a kind of a sync melee type of system where you would get, when you got close to an enemy, you'd end up in a kind of a synced animation melee type of system that resulted in a really cool death of the enemy. You initiate this syncing of you with the enemy, and then this animation plays out. You would look at that and think, oh, Glory Kills, But it was slow. It was a very deliberate, very cinematic way of approaching that. Even at the kind of pre full reboot, we'd had some meetings where we were like, this is cool. It's just slow. Can we make it a little bit more like, kind of like Fruit Ninja with demons, where it's just like, these things are fast. The animators developed this animatic, taking the work and the ideas that had been done there. The idea that came out of this was this push forward combat. And so they did this animatic of kind of push forward combat and the initiation of Glory Kills.
The thing that really excited me about is when we first started seeing the Glory Kill system come together. It kind of redefined first-person combat for me and really started driving it close in. We had an iteration of that in the previous game, but I think that Marty and the animation team and Hugo really worked together to come up with something very intense and exciting for that. So it was pretty cool to see that come together. And I think for me personally, that really energized the project for me.
And again, it was like that was a good moment, but it was to a great extent built on a knowledge base that had built up through the course of developing the first version of it.
So let's dive into some of that stuff then, the sort of like what ended up being what Doom is.
Yeah.
First time you showed it, I remember, okay, obviously behind closed doors at QuakeCon. First of all, how do you end up putting hundreds of people in a room who don't end up leaking it?
I don't know. You know what? And I'm actually we'll give you some of the footage so you can.
That'd be amazing.
We have it. It's never been seen before. QuakeCon I always refer to as the greatest home field advantage in the history of games. Almost our entire team at the time was in the audience. I always say how lucky I am to be able to be the one to kind of stand up in front of an audience and present the game, whether it's at QuakeCon or E3. I am only a representation of the people on the team. That even this year is like I'm just trying to do my best to represent the team we have here. I got to represent a team that was all sitting in the audience and then say, you know what, you guys just want to see the game? And we're sharing this just with you. Tim just mentioned that we turned off the Twitch TV. This is just for you. We have a lot to share with everybody outside of this room at a later date. But we want this to be special. And just like we want this to be special for you, we want the first taste of Doom for everybody else to be special too. So I would like to make sure everybody turns off their recording devices. Put those cell phones in your pocket, camcorders down, take off the Google Glass. The Google Glass freaks your friends out anyway. As much as I want you to understand our approach to Doom combat, talking about it really just doesn't do it a lot of justice. So, you know where this is headed, right? The pictures are great, but I think we figured you guys would like to just see a little bit of the game, right? All right.
That's great. I think you like it. Awesome.
People refer to that as the best moment of their careers. You can have all the confidence in the world in what you're doing, but you just never quite know what the response is going to be. But to have like a big audience just cheer is the best gratification in the world.
I don't think that there were really any accidents. I think that, you know, we built what we felt really good. We thought that it paid tribute to the original Dooms, and we thought it looked amazing and ran great. And you know, we just hoped that you know, players worldwide would think the same.
That was the story of how Doom was rescued from the depths of development hell. But there's a lot more to this tale. Tomorrow we investigate how Doom found its wonderful self-aware voice and the challenges of making the right first impression. See you then.
That doesn't mean that the game is dumb, because I think it's deceptively smart, you know, and sophisticated. It's just easy to understand, which is honestly how things should be. I always compare it to like Apple products. With Apple, when it's at its best, my son is 6, he knows how to use an iPad. You know, that's good design. So, yet that thing is obviously pretty sophisticated.
Has your son played Doom?
I don't know if I should say that on camera.
Well, we know the answer then.
He may or may not have played Doom. He might have made it to.
Great answer.
He might have made it to Foundry. He might be struggling with the Shield guys. And his mother might be extremely upset about this. This could be an ongoing problem in my house.